Okay, we're gonna get started. Welcome everybody and greetings from New York City. This morning, the TUED team here, we have Michael O'Neill, who's working tech, and John Treat, who will be co-facilitating the meeting this morning with myself. And Sean Sweeney is joining us from South Africa today, where he's with comrades working in the struggle to fight the privatization of Eskom. So we'll hear more about that later today. So we want to welcome you and thanks for joining. We're looking forward to today's meeting, the Green New Deal, Can Utilities Be Reclaimed and Reformed? We have 65 registered from 37 different unions and federations, and we're calling in from 17 different countries today. So we have a very packed schedule and a great list of contributors, so we'll try to keep things moving along. Let me just run through the agenda quickly. So we have the welcome, which we're doing right now, and then we'll have a quick TUED update from Sean and John, and we'll also hear a brief intro from Lala with comrades in Colombia. Then we'll move on to the bulk of our contributions this morning, which is reclaim and reform of the utilities. We'll hear first from international folks giving reports about reclaiming utilities and defending public ownership. And then we will move on to a discussion on the United States, and we'll hear from contributors working on these issues in the US. Then for the last part of the discussion between 11:10, 11:30 US time, New York, we'll have an open discussion where people can feel free to join the stack and make comments, and hopefully we'll have a very exciting and lively discussion. And we'll close at 11:30 US East New York time. So I'm going to hand it over now to Sean in Cape Town for his coordinator's political report.
Okay, I've just unmuted myself. This is Sean Sweeney in Cape Town at the moment. I'm with Jeff Rudin from AIDC. I'll keep this very brief because a week or so ago we sent out the what is really an annual report for TUED, which was we titled Advancing a Disruptive Solidarity, and I think that title warrants a little bit of an explanation. It's disruptive in the sense that we're challenging the dominant view that the private capital is going to lead the energy transition, and we're also trying to disrupt the debates in the trade union movement, the global trade union movement, so we get these real issues out there into the discourse. But we do it in the spirit of solidarity and internationalism. So I just thought that warranted an explanation. In the annual report, we point out that 6 unions, there are several new unions, I think it was 6 or 8, representing 2.5 million workers that joined the project in 2018, which is now around about 67, 68 unions from 22 or 23 different countries. And the report goes into some detail about where TUED is taking off and the work that we're prioritizing in different parts of the world. And so that's really all I want to say about the coordinator's report. But if you're new to TUED, I know we've got Jim Mowat from Unite. I think this is his first ever TUED Global Forum. He's in the UK, Britain's largest union. And we got Akamile from NUMSA. NUMSA is part of TUED, but I think this is her first call. She's the communications director, I believe, for NUMSA, and is all over the media here. And we come back to that issue with the unbundling or breaking up of Eskom now on the agenda of the ANC. And there may be other new people, so I just wanted to say that this project is about trying to advance pro-public social ownership and control of energy systems as part of a broad decarbonization agenda, but a strong movement-based radical left anti-capitalist agenda. That's what we're all about, and that's where I'll stop and see if John can do a quick financial report.
Yep, great. Thanks, Sean. Yeah, just very quickly, I'm just going to make a few quick comments. As we had reported at our call in December, we essentially reached our target for last year, roughly the same amount as the year before. We had hoped to grow a little bit, so I think there's still a little work to be done there. We have not put a lot of time into chasing the foundation funding in the last several months. That's generally quite difficult for a project like this. I think many of the foundations have struggled to figure out how to support union-based work in a manner that is really confronting the crisis. Thankfully, the unions, a number of the unions continue to provide consistent support. Those are increasingly being made as recurring annual contributions automatically, which I think is crucial to ultimately getting where we want to be with the project. Since the project started, nearly 30 unions have made contributions. Things seem to be more or less on track this year, but as always, we depend on union contributions. And the more we're able to draw in from those sources, the more not only financial stability the project has, but the more political credibility as well. The project is also supported by the institution here at CUNY, the School for Labor and Urban Studies, as well as the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung's New York office. Without that support, the project really wouldn't be possible in its current form. I think I'll just leave it there, Sean, unless Sean, there's anything you want to add on this.
No, not at all. Thank you, John.
All right.
Okay.
Great.
Thanks, Sean and John, for those reports. I'm gonna hand it over to Lala Penaranda, who is interpreting this morning for some comrades who are here for the first time joining this space from Colombia, Sergio Zamora and Ricardo Munoz, and I'm gonna have her give a little just brief update and intro.
Hi. So yes, I'll be on the phone doing interpretation, translation. I'm in Bogota and the comrades are in Cali. And this is something that they wrote up. I'll just read it. It's brief. Sintrem Cali is excited to join TUED and hopes to bring more Colombian unions on board. We are the trade union workers of the municipal companies of Cali, founded 81 years ago. We currently have 1,800 members representing workers in the public sector, including water and sewage, energy, and telecommunications. A few days ago, our union president survived an assassination attempt by hitmen. This comes at a time of heightened targeted violence, with 260 social leaders killed since the signing of the 2016 peace agreement. Despite the violence, the Colombian labor movement is currently quite active. Today, our union will be marching with teachers across Colombia who have called for a 24-hour strike and a day of national mobilization. Meanwhile, the Confederation of Workers of Colombia have convened workers to mobilize against the government's draft National Development Plan law, which is an austerity package containing cuts in subsidies and worker layoffs. Additionally, we are joining environmental organizations in staunchly opposing the Hidroatuango project, a hydroelectric plant that has recently devastated one of Colombia's most important rivers. Lastly, all of this is unfolding within the context of Iván Duque's far-right neoliberal government, which is furthering the privatization of state enterprises, weakening workers' rights, and dismantling the 2016 peace agreement. President Duque has announced to continue with the sale of Ecopetrol, the main state company, the petroleum company, and he is lending himself to a possible military intervention of Venezuela, which we vehemently oppose. Thank you.
Lala, we stand in solidarity with you and the comrades in Colombia.
Thanks.
We're going to move to our main discussion now, reclaim and reform the utilities. I'm going to hand it over to John.
Yeah, thanks, Irene. We've got contributions from a number of people. Joshua, did you manage to get on the call?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, great. Sorry, before we jump in though, I think two quick things. Michael first, I think, was going to give a quick kind of technical note so that people know how to mute and unmute themselves. Michael, if you can jump in.
Yes, so by default, everyone is muted, and
you can unmute yourself on the phone by hitting *6 on your keypad. So use *6 to unmute yourself and then to mute yourself when you're done speaking. And if you are using the web interface, if you could please let us know when you'd like to speak by sending us a message in the chat box. If you can put your question or comment there, then we'll add you to the speaker stack that's on screen. And if you're on your phone and you're not able to chat with us, then we'll just make sure to open space for people to ask their question, and we'll just ask you to unmute yourself at that time. So again, *6 to unmute.
Great. Yeah, that's fine. Thanks, Michael. Sean, did you want to make some introductory comments to this session as well before we move to Joshua? Are you muted?
Yes. Thanks, Sean. Yes. I mean, the reason why we're focusing on, well, the issue of the utilities is because the whole energy democracy discussion in recent years has really neglected the role of new utilities. For many, the utilities are part of the problem. If only communities could generate more power, own more generation capacity, then everything will be fine, and the utilities just got to get out of the way. Of course, there's complications because many unions are in utilities, but they're not in the distributed sector. And so, but aside from that, there are all sorts of technical questions around how a transition to renewables is going to be a sufficient scale and how it's going to be balanced in different grids and so on. So there are technical questions. But what's the main reason for pushing this is that clearly now utilities are at more in the center of the struggle. We've seen in the US growing numbers of calls to reclaim the utilities from that were once privatized and are now investor-owned utilities. And we're seeing around the world the ongoing struggles to protect utilities from privatization, while at the same time trying to promote a reform agenda, because many of the utilities and the large energy companies are part of a model of energy production which is all about making money and not about satisfying social and ecological needs. So we saw this really proliferation of struggles. And the second reason why we focused it on the Green New Deal discussion that is opened up in the US, and we can say more about that later, is because there are a few voices now asking the question, what role do the utilities play in the Green New Deal when left Democratic elected members of Congress are calling for 100% renewable energy by 2030 or 2035, but saying very little at the moment about the role of utilities. So how can we in the trade union movement, where our members work in utilities, how can we participate in those discussions in a way that promotes the Green New Deal, but does so in a sort of a realistic and grounded manner? So that's the sort of the essence of this conversation. So we've called on comrades who are involved in these struggles to internationally in the Philippines, Australia, Korea, Norway, Britain, and I can't see the rest of the agenda, but and South Africa, of course. So we'll be hearing about that in a few minutes. So I'll stop there.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Sean. So I'll introduce Joshua Mata first from the Philippines. Some people on the call, I'm sure, would not be aware that last year the power sector unions in the Philippines got together and formed a new federation together. Joshua was very involved in that, and I think that's part of the background for the conversation here, if I'm not mistaken. So Joshua, I'll hand over to you.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. As was mentioned by John, we did have a Congress where a number of unions from the electric cooperatives in the Philippines, as well as private electricity generation companies, have come together. And the Congress actually had as its slogan, resist, reclaim, and restructure. And we even had the Secretary of Labor speaking right behind that slogan. And I'm not so sure if he understands what that actually meant. But having said that, the more important point is that we are now in a context where there is once again a push to corporatize the electric cooperatives in the Philippines, and that now they're doing that by coming up with a legislation that would challenge the franchises of electric cooperatives that are up for expiration in the next 5 years. So there are now applications to try to take over their franchises, no, from the private sector. And second, even the government itself, the National Electrification Administration, has come up with a list of about more than a dozen electric cooperatives that they now want to be taken over by the private companies. And the only reason that we were able to to force them to back off is the fact that we're now going through an election, which just opened up last week, a few days ago. And that would make things very, very unpopular for this authoritarian government that we have at this point in time. So that's the background. And obviously, after the elections in May, we will certainly see another round of massive actions in order to fight back against corporatization. So I'll stop right there.
Great. Thanks, Joshua. Very interesting situation that we're on. I know many of us are following very closely and appreciate being kept or having the chance to be kept so well informed of what's going on. I'm going to ask, I'm not sure how we'll end up on time, so I want to ask if we can hold questions for individual speakers until the end, and we'll just see where we stand and if we can quickly take a few before we move to the next session. So I want to see if Wol-san has managed to join us from Korea. Wol-san, are you on? Possibly not. There was, I think, a family emergency that made it unclear if Wol-san was going to be able to join us. She may jump on later, and if so, we'll try to come back and give her some space. Lance McCallum. Lance, I think, is there?
Yeah, thanks very much, John. And hello, everyone on the call. It's Lance McCallum from Australia here. Publicly owned utilities, we've got a mix of public and privately owned sort of smattered throughout the country, and that mix is determined on a state basis, given that it's the states that own the utilities. Those that are under public control are generally corporatized, and that's kind of the basic breakdown. In Australia, when it comes to the rollout of renewable energy, we've had a national renewable energy target, which hasn't been expressed as a percentage of overall electricity generation. Rather, it's been expressed as a gigawatt generation target, and in our case, it's 33,500 gigawatts. That renewable energy target has been is due to expire next year. However, that gigawatt target of 33,500 gigawatts has already been met. So that's about sort of 18 months to 2 years early. That has been met almost exclusively by private investment or forms of public-private investment. What that has meant on the ground for the rollout of renewable energy is we've seen all the kinds of issues that come along with private renewables, such as insecure work and in some instances very questionable work practices by the private renewable companies. I did mention that there are some publicly owned generation businesses in Australia. There's also publicly owned sort of pumped hydro storage. We have a large hydro storage scheme in Australia. That's still publicly owned and owned by the federal government. But as I mentioned earlier, all other publicly owned utilities are owned by the state government. I'm from Queensland in Australia. In Queensland, we own both the transmission and distribution businesses still in public ownership, and about 50 to 60% of the overall state generation is owned publicly, and that's broken down into 2 different generators. However, we're about to establish a new generator in Queensland, which is called CleanCo, and that's a 100% publicly owned renewable generator. We would expect that to be up and running by the end of this year. It's probably been about 12 to 18 months in development, and was a major commitment of the government in Queensland, alongside a 50% renewable energy target by 2030 and net zero emissions by 2050. The other thing that's happening in Queensland that might be of note to comrades is that the Queensland government has recently established a just transition group, first of its kind in Australia. So this is a dedicated government group that's looking at ensuring a just transition for workers and communities as Queensland moves towards those 2 targets of net zero emission and a minimum of 50% renewable energy. That group is going to establish a formal just transition policy framework for Queensland. So that's underway now and is new and an exciting development. Otherwise, Australia is heading to the polls for a election in May. So very, very close. And climate and energy has been a major issue in the political landscape in Australia during over the last 2.5, 3 years, and will remain so going into this election. That's it from me. Thanks, everybody.
That's great. Thanks, Lance. I'm not sure if you mentioned at the beginning, we lost sound for just a moment, but I should have introduced you properly anyway. Lance has been with TUED for a while. Originally, I think was with the electrical trade unions when you were first involved, and then moved to the Australian Council of Trade Unions, and then fairly recently to the Just Transition, the Queensland Government Just Transition Group. So a real asset to the project, helping us figure out how to advance a radical agenda through government bureaucracies, among other things. So I'm going to turn now, actually a little bit out of order from what's in the agenda. It's a bit late for folks in South Africa. I know it's much later for people in other places, and very early for some. But I want to turn to the NUMSA comrade Phakamile Hlubi-Majola, who is the NUMSA spokesperson, and as Sean mentioned, has been in the media. We may want to circulate a link if we haven't already to a very good interview. So Phakamile, can I turn over to you to speak about the situation there with Eskom? Hold on, if you're speaking, we're gonna, okay, now we're gonna unmute. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, now we can hear you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for giving me this platform. I really appreciate it.
Great.
My name is Phakamile Hlubi-Majola. I'm the national spokesperson for the largest trade union in South Africa, which is NUMSA. We represent about 370,000 now, 370,000 workers, not just metal workers, which is traditionally what was our industry. But since 2013, we've actually expanded our scope, and we now organize along the value chain. So we are organizing in infrastructure, we're organizing in transportation. So those are some of the sectors that we've expanded into. As comrades have correctly mentioned in their introduction, NUMSA is a trade union which is also organized at one of South Africa's only provider of electricity, which is Eskom. Eskom is a state-owned entity, and Eskom has been the provider of electricity to South Africans since its establishment many, many decades ago. Unfortunately, I don't have the figures of exactly when Eskom was established, but they've always been a state-owned entity and been the sole provider of electricity. They were created under the oppressive racist apartheid government, but the work of electrifying the country still remains their mandate even after 1994. Now, comrades have spoken a little bit about some of our struggles, so I will touch on that as well. Basically, what's happened is that since 2017, Eskom made an announcement in early 2017, I think it was around March. The CEO at that time, Matela Koko, confirmed to the public that there would be several power stations closing down in a section of South Africa called Mpumalanga. And he said that the closure of those power stations, there were 5 of them in total, coal-fired power stations, which provide electricity to Eskom. He said that the closure of those power stations was as a result of the fact that Eskom had to make way for government's renewable energy project. Now, our government has also is a signatory to the Paris Accord. They have ratified the Paris Accord, and they have identified a program known as the Independent Power Producer Program as the renewable energy program which the government is rolling out. It's a program which is heavily subsidized. It's effectively private corporations who are providing renewable energy directly to Eskom. That's how it's operating. And as a trade union, that was actually really the point where we really began to make a lot of noise around this, because for us, first of all, I think it's important that I must mention that NUMSA is one of the trade unions which actually has a position on renewable energy. We believe, and we have always said since 2012 when we resolved on this, that we want a renewable energy program which is socially owned and for the benefit of the working class majority and the poor. We would effectively like a renewable energy, a just transition, as defined by the ILO. So that has been our position. So of course, when the announcement was made in 2017 that power stations would close, you must understand that these power stations, in terms of direct employment, it's about 10,000 workers at Eskom, if I'm not mistaken, who would directly lose their jobs if these power stations close. But in total, 100,000 jobs actually are on the line if these power stations close, because in Mpumalanga is a province that its economy is built around the existence of those power stations. So even though Eskom itself does not employ 100,000 people, there is a whole value chain of industries that are dependent on Eskom's existence or on the existence of those power stations in that province. So when the government made the announcement that these power stations would close, this then for us galvanized us, because first of all, we have a lot of members at Eskom. We represent about 10,000 people. Although we are not the biggest trade union, we are the second largest. But because we are the biggest trade union in South Africa, we have a lot of influence. So we had a duty to obviously protect members. But more importantly, we then began in 2017 to start really, really agitating for this just transition, because for us, the manner in which this government is rolling out renewable energy is unjust. There's been no consultation. There's been no involvement of labor or the community in this process. And the decision to close those power stations would have a major impact on South Africa. We are a country that currently has a 37% unemployment rate and growing, poverty levels where more than half of the population lives in abject poverty. So you can understand that if an entire province is about to lose 100,000 jobs, this for us becomes a huge issue. So we have been campaigning since 2017 to try and block the government from implementing this program. In fact, we have been calling for its cancellation. We are demanding a just transition. And as of this week, the government also then confirmed that they were unbundling ESCOM. Now for us, when they say they are unbundling ESCOM, what that means is it's a way for them to privatize. So ESCOM is a very, very big entity in South Africa. They're saying that this entity must be split up into 3 smaller parts: generation, transmission, and distribution, as a way for it to deal with some of its financial problems. Our state-owned entity has a lot of financial problems. It's hugely in debt. We're talking about 419 billion rand in debt. Sorry, I don't know what that is in dollars, but it's a lot of money. As a justification of the fact that ESCOM is hugely in debt, and yes, it is true, it has been poorly managed, and that's because of corruption from the governing party, but those are all, related issues. They now want to justify privatization. They are calling it unbundling. They are claiming that there will be no job losses, but as a union, we are convinced that privatization is what they intend to do and that it will result in massive job losses. We are saying this because when we look at the government's own macroeconomic program known as the National Development Plan, as well as other documents which have been written by various ministries in the past, like for example, the Department of Energy 2000 had a paper on how to transform our state-owned entities. Our government talks about privatizing state-owned entities. So politically, they are unwilling to admit that privatization is what they want to do, because we also have elections in May, and the ANC, which is the governing party, depends very heavily on Labour for support. And in fact, there is an alliance between the ANC government and one of South Africa's largest federations, COSATU. So it has so it's still trying to please its voting base by claiming that this process won't harm workers, won't be job losses. But we are very clear that actually this is what will be the effect. So our campaign has been to educate as much as we can the working class majority and communities to support us, to defend our state-owned entities and prevent them from privatization, firstly. But secondly, to get them also to come on board and make the demand with us for a socially owned renewable energy program to be adopted by the government for the benefit of the majority of people. And I'll stop there.
Great. Thanks, Phakamile. That's very useful. And I suspect people have realized that one of the reasons Sean is in South Africa right now is to sort of have a more on the ground sense of what's happening, so that we can figure out how best to support what's going on there and the struggles that are well underway and quite hot. So that's very useful. I'm going to now, we actually do not have Jan Olaf from Sweden, the Electric Union in Sweden, on the call. He was not able to make it. I'm going to turn to Jim Mallett, who's an executive at Unite and is in charge of climate policy. But I want to ask Sean first to just give a quick overview of the policy situation around energy in the UK. We've been quite actively involved in that, and Sean has in particular. Sean? Have we lost you?
I'm sorry, I was having trouble unmuting. But I'm okay.
There we go.
I'm also joined by Sandra van Neerkerk, who's been very active in TUED and is here with us in Cape Town at AIDC. Yeah, just a quick summary for people who are new to this discussion. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn became leader of the Labour Party a couple of years ago, and then had to fight an election very quickly, where he put in the manifesto to take energy back into public ownership, with a particular focus on the transmission and distribution systems. Since then, TUED in the UK, we have 7 or 8 unions active. I've had several meetings with Labour Party shadow ministers, and we've been trying to put forward the view that if we're going to take back the energy sector, we need to take it all back. Taking back parts of it will not work for technical reasons, but as well as political reasons. Jim has been on the executive of Unite, the largest union in the UK, has been promoting that position. But all of the unions are, because they have different wings inside the three big unions, Unison, Unite, and GMB, they all have energy workers. And there's quite a lot of debate going on within those unions on Labour Party policy. So this is definitely a moving target for us, but we've been putting a lot of work into it, and we will have a TUED conference in Manchester on July 8th and 9th, I believe are the dates, where we're going to be trying to push this idea of a more comprehensive reclaiming of the power sector. And I'll just say in closing that on the other side of this debate are those who believe that the incumbent generators are basically dead in the water economically, that they won't survive anyway, so why bother to take them over again and just promote renewables. The problem with the renewables is it's all privately run. It's mostly focused now on offshore wind. So some of the things Pagamile just said about independent power producers and the dynamics around that will play out in the debates around the Labour Party and trade union policy in the UK. So I just wanted to help comrades be sort of familiar with some of those details before Jim speaks.
Great. Thanks, Sean. Jim, can I turn to you? Jim's been, as Sean indicated, invaluable in taking forward these debates in the UK context. Do we have Jim on?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Right, I've got you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Right, okay. I'm Jim Mowat. Incidentally, English is my second language because I'm Scottish. And I've been an official in generating and as a lead negotiator in the energy unions for 20 years before I became the director. Just a couple of quick points. The progressive unions in the UK, I think, are now, thank you to Sean and yourselves, pulling together to promote not just the decarbonisation of UK economy. And as you imagine, there is an appetite for just transition because essentially we're supporting displaced energy workers. One of the difficulties is the need for a just transition is appreciated among the progressive unions, but not necessarily with all the unions and the general population. So we're working on getting it on the political radar screen for the general public. Incidentally, the UK generating, we call it electricity supply industry, has dramatically been reconfigured since privatisation over 20 years ago. The coal industry is all but gone, and nuclear is a diminishing force. I'll come back to that. The renewables are increasing. The difficulty is the unions aren't very big in the renewables simply because they're in the private sector, and we're finding it difficult to break in, but it is an ambition. It's interesting in the nuclear generation just now, the Labour Party, the opposition party, and the good news is 95% of the progressive unions are affiliated to the Labour Party. I would suggest that they're ahead of us in terms of their vision, that the energy should be public, it should be democratised, it should be clean and efficient. So that's an enormous asset to the unions, that we have this political platform to build on with the Labour Party. And we're at the heart of that, I must say. We are very influential within the Labour Party. Our big job is to win the whole of the trade union movement. That's a trade union congress, as it's known in the United Kingdom, over to our policy. that it's only by public ownership that we can achieve our objectives. An immediate agenda for Unite in UK is a discussion that we're having with the newly politically elected metropolitan mayors. And these individuals have been elected to represent conurbations. And we've been talking to them about having a holistic approach to the whole of infrastructure. And an example would be on housing and energy, that they require a political solution. So we're looking at community ownership of power. And we're doing that. We're actually having meetings today and next week on that. The Springboard, you may read about this, the Springboard's Liverpool, Birmingham and Manchester. And we're riveting in those demands into Labour's policy commitment of networks by public ownership of the electricity and gas networks. I'm just trying to think, I was in there, so I want to hoover up. Interestingly, you might know, there's a wind of change on nuclear. My union's heavily committed to nuclear generation. The biggest station, which is £25 billion, been built in England and the UK, has been invested in by Chinese capital and the French company ADF. But it's interesting that the Japanese have withdrawn from 2 nuclear projects. So we're in a state of flux. I think the TUED, for the lack of a better word, manifesto is required, and I believe we'll win that. Thank you, comrades.
Great. Thanks, Jim. Very useful, and I think I'm sure I'm not alone in feeling like we're in good hands, knowing that you're at the core of leading those fights. I want to see if Wol-San has managed to join the call quickly. I don't think she has any indication, no. All right. We are also a little bit behind on time, so rather than taking time now for questions, I'm going to ask that we hold those to the end. But if you do have a question or comment for, based on one of these initial reports, if you could just indicate in the chat maybe that you have a question, who it's for, or something along those lines. If you can give us a little bit of detail, so we may end up with questions we need to sort of organize, prioritize a little bit. So then I'm going to hand over to Irene. We'll move to the second major item on the agenda.
All right, thanks, John. And thanks, comrades from around the world, sharing the struggles that are, current and present around defending public utilities and fighting for public good. So we're going to pivot now to the U.S. and Sean already mentioned some about, the Green New Deal earlier in the meeting. We are going to, we're going to actually get Peter Knowlton in first, just because he has an emergency union meeting he needs to get to unexpectedly, and we are also running short on time. So I'll just say that there's been a lot of sort of openings and opportunities and discussion, in part because of the introduction of the Green New Deal, generating a lot of conversation and opening up questions about utilities and the role of utilities, and for us, what role the trade unions can play in moving the conversation towards public ownership. And we'll hear first from Peter Knowlton, who is the president of UE in the U.S., the United Electrical, Radio, and Machine Workers of America. And I'm going to hand it over to Peter. I'm going to try to unmute him.
Peter. Is Peter joining by phone, possibly?
He's probably by phone. He should. I thought he was. His name was.
Okay.
We lost him.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, yep. Great. Peter.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, because I was on mute. I just apologize. I have to get on, and I'm on I was supposed to be last. Now I'm first, because we have an emergency phone call with one of our largest locals, which is GE Locomotive. is being sold to a company called Wabtec that's supposed to take place February 25th, and the company has massive concessions still on the table of what they will implement when the sale goes through. And if it's any shadow of those demands, there will likely be a strike. And it's our largest manufacturing local in the States, and will be a fairly significant strike nationally. So I apologize for that, but can't be helped. So I just need to get off in a few minutes. But TUED had asked me just briefly, UE has been a long supporter of public power in the United States since our founding, probably in the 30s. We actually believe that the ownership of production ought to be in the public realm, whether it's production, distribution, or services. That when it's in the public realm, we're a lot happier. But there's some couple things that I just wanted to raise very quickly about this issue. Just general, put a broad brush. There's people who know much more than I from Maine and Rhode Island who are going to be talking about specifics of what's happening in the U.S., which is actually very exciting and very positive. But just a couple of things from our perspective. One, people should know that the new Green Deal in the text does not directly deal with the issue of municipalization or transferring private ownership, production and distribution or extraction into public hands. And that is I think that's something that needs to be filled in. It's a missing component to the legislation. Now, it's not specific legislation. It just lays out broad concepts and enabling legislation. But on that particular piece, it falls short. So in the U.S., we're going to need to fill that slot in. And it's very similar discussion, and especially in the Democratic Party, around the issue of healthcare for all. When you're talking about a massive switch of resources from the private sector into the public sector, you always end up in getting, especially the center to the right of the Democratic Party, they get very nervous. So I suspect that's one of the reasons why it's not in there in a bigger way. So we will deal with that as we go along. But the situations in Maine, what's happening in Rhode Island that folks will hear about is very, very encouraging. And it's something I think we ought to model after and use those examples around the rest of the country as a way to begin to bring that issue of municipalization and public power to the fore in relation to the new Green Deal and the conversion. And then lastly, I just want folks to know that there's a bunch I live in Massachusetts, and there's a bunch of municipal utilities in Massachusetts who are represented by the IBEW and other utility workers. And by far and away in Massachusetts, in almost every single case, the electric rates or the rates for utility are much less than what the private investor utilities control. And National Grid is by far and away the largest privately owned utility in the Northeast. And they charge much higher rates than do most of the municipal electrical utilities that are almost all of them are very strong union members, a lot of IBEW locals and other locals around New England. And I think the example of Maine helps us see how we can begin to do the conversion over and be able to guarantee people jobs and a pathway into other jobs that are union, good pay, and they don't lose any benefits, which is also spoken of generally in the new Green Deal and is something we need to really bolster up and make it a little bit more robust. So that's the end of my report, and thanks everybody for your patience.
Great, thanks Peter, and thanks for staying on to give us that perspective. I'm gonna move quickly now to who's listed on the agenda as speaking first, who is Varshini Prakash from Sunrise Movement. And some of you may have heard when the Green New Deal was first sort of unveiled, it was because of the work of the Sunrise Movement that really brought attention to it. It is a group of young adults, young people who have really been very active and inspiring in mobilizing people to really fight for good jobs and a safer planet. And simultaneously did a sit-in at Nancy Pelosi's office and sort of unveiled the Green New Deal and really put the limelight onto this proposal, the Green New Deal. And so Varshini is the interim executive director of Sunrise Movement right now, and I'm going to just have her give a little background about both Sunrise Movement, but also the Green New Deal and sort of where things are at right now. And if there's anything in particular about the challenges or the opportunities around public ownership, that'd be great to hear also.
Cool.
So over to you, Prashini.
Thanks, Irene. Hello, everyone. My name is Varshini Prakash. For better or for worse, I'm the permanent executive director of Sunrise. It is good to be with you all here today. So just briefly about the background of Sunrise, we launched in July of 2017 with about 6 people, all under the age of 26, to set out with the mission of making climate change an urgent political priority in this country in a few different means, by getting fossil fuel money out of our political system, having seen the way that millions upon millions of dollars had been spent to buy out politicians of both political parties, and stymie progress on the climate on the climate crisis for decades. But also to both elect climate champions and kick out fossil fuel funded politicians and build the political will and the public consensus for the solutions, the real solutions to the crisis at scale that science and justice demand. So we, as I said, we launched about 1.5 years ago, and we really lie at the nexus of building both people power through protest, organizing, grassroots community organizing, and demonstration, and combining that with electoral power as well. And so on the political power side of things, we ran a 6-month-long electoral fellowship for about 85 young people in 5 key swing states to elect climate champions and train up the next generation of youth leadership on this issue. And we saw huge successes from getting over 19 out of the 30 candidates we endorsed into office, including people like Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, to also, shining a light on the corruption of our politicians who take a lot of money from the fossil fuel industry and have yet to and as a result do not take action to protect our generation's future. And on the people power side of things, as Irene pointed out, we led a demonstration and have subsequently led many demonstrations since then to put the Green New Deal on the map. Prior to November 13th, when we had our sit-in and Nancy Pelosi, who is a prominent Democratic politician in America, we had seen that climate change was not even a discussion in American politics. Nobody was talking about it. If anything, the debate was still floundering in the realm of, do you believe the science or not? And we've seen a huge uptick since that moment of interest, excitement, and energy around the Green New Deal. And recently also seen the right and people like Mitch McConnell and Trump, in fact, going on the offensive, attacking the Green New Deal and trying to cut it at its knees before it gets a chance to really, before we get a chance to do something significant legislatively. So for many of you, as you know, the Green New Deal is really aimed at tackling some of the greatest crises of our lifetimes. The rampant and staggering levels of wealth inequality we have in this country and also world round. Like currently living in an economy where 8 people own as much wealth as the bottom 3.5 billion. As well as the climate crisis and the issues of racial inequity that continue to plague our democracies in America, but also around the world. And so we see the Green New Deal as it is a massive 10-year plan to transform virtually every aspect of our economy and our society in a world war at a scale that we haven't seen really since World War II, to tackle the climate crisis, to create millions of good, high-paying jobs for working families, and to work to eliminate poverty in the process. by putting money back in the hands of working people everywhere. And so I'm really excited to be on here. I wasn't able to listen to every single person who spoke, but I have really appreciated what I've heard so far, and wanted to say, you know, a lot of what the Green New Deal is actually about is about tackling the climate crisis, but bolstering economic security and prosperity for all people. So recently, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Markey introduced a short resolution, as the person before me was discussing. And sorry, I hope you can hear me. There's some other folks in our office as well. Let me know if it's distracting. But okay, great, thanks. It's distracting me. What this is really just a high-level vision-setting document that establishes what the high watermark for climate ambition in this country looks like. It doesn't include everything in there. Every single part and pillar of the Green New Deal could be an 1,000-page bill on its own. So we understand fully, I think the intention that Ocasio-Cortez and Markey had was to actually say that incremental policies on the issue of climate crisis are no longer acceptable, and that we need action that's actually commensurate with what the latest climate science is telling us is necessary. And that is what this document really shows. And so it includes everything from transitioning to an 100% clean and renewable economy to programs to retrofit every building in America to make it more energy efficient, to supporting sustainable agriculture, to guaranteeing access to clean water and clean air. It's honestly a really impressive and inspiring document for a vision for America to actually reestablish the social contract that hasn't been there since 100 years ago when FDR passed his Green New Deal, his own New Deal. So we are, I'll stop there. I know that there are lots of questions about every single part of this, and heard people talking about the need to sort of like put power back to democratize the energy economy and actually ensure that we are able to decentralize power and put more power in the hands of workers and in our local economies. And so I just want to say that that is definitely something that at Sunrise we're also looking to push forward as the resolution becomes interpreted and put into actual legislation, and as we see different congresspeople and senators taking pieces of this and building out the programs and policies that would actually execute a Green New Deal. So thank you. And if you're looking to know more about Sunrise, I would suggest y'all check out sunrisemovement.org. And none of this is going to be possible without thousands of institutions, groups, unions, businesses, movements, think tanks, and more being a part of this struggle. And the original New Deal did not pass without organized labor and class struggle, and we're positive that it will not happen this time either without that. So we're really excited to work together on this massive project to rebuild America.
Great, thanks so much, Varshini. I know you need to get off soon, so I was just going to open it up for folks to see if there is a couple of questions right now, because I just want to say that the Green New Deal has made a huge splash in America, but also around the world, people are talking about it. And I know we have some comrades, international comrades who may have some questions. Some folks have been talking about the possibility of doing something like the Green New Deal in their own regions and countries. So just want to see if there's any immediate questions before Varshini has to run.
I think that David's question regarding the March 14th student strike was directed towards Varshini.
Can you,
if I recall correctly?
Because I can't see.
So yeah, can we get a sense if there are students and unions will support the 15 of March student strike. I heard that
Yeah.
45 meeting.
We will.
Yeah.
So we're actually working, a lot of Sunrise members are already slated to strike on that day, and we are going to be discussing with a team of 12-year-olds and 7-year-olds tonight at 6 p.m. how we can actually get more folks in the U.S. engaged and excited about it. So we will organize this young people strike in solidarity with the global movement that Greta Thunberg has.
This is David Boyes here. My question is also for all the unions on this call. Who has heard about this in their country? Because apparently there are 40 countries currently preparing for the students' strike. And some of them are doing the strike every Friday anyways, or every Thursday. But it's important for us to hear or to think. Whether we answer now or we type in the chat or coordinate with TUED, but I think this would be an interesting piece for us to support. Thanks.
Should come back to it at the end.
Yeah. Yeah, David, maybe we can come back to that at the end during the open discussion. Thank you. Any other questions? Can you read that?
Those were all from earlier.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Great.
Great. Well, last thing I'll just say is I really encourage folks to reach out and would love to connect for a lot of the unions that are on here. My email is varshini@sunrisemovement.org. Perhaps you can just share with everyone, Irene, but would love to connect and get you roped in. And also, if you have questions and just want to learn more, love to start that conversation.
Great, thank you. I will share that that email, and I'll just say that you guys have been incredibly effective in mobilizing people, and it's not just young people. Yesterday, you sent out an email for an emergency meeting at 9 in the morning, and there was 1,000 people on the call at 8 p.m., and it was people of all ages, and it's very inspiring and exciting. So thank you for
Thank
what
you.
you guys do. Yeah.
Yes, that warmed my heart. It was really incredible to see. Thank you so much for having me on here.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for joining us. Okay, we're going to move on to Angel Yaramillo Figueroa, who is the president of UTIER, the Electrical Industry and Irrigation Workers Union in Puerto Rico. He has an interpreter, Freddy San Martinez, who will be helping us with the interpretation. I'll just say that after Hurricane Maria in 2017, you know, much of the island was without electricity for a long, long time, and they have a public utilities PREPA, but there were many issues with it, a lot of debt, a lot of mismanagement, and difficulties. And so since the hurricane, there has been announcements to privatize since last year. But as of now, I don't believe there has been any purchase of it. No one has actually come forward to buy it. So I'm going to hand it over to Angel and Freddy San to give us an update on what's going on in Puerto Rico. And Michael is trying to unmute you.
Go ahead, Angel.
Hey, hello, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, there's Freddy San down there.
Yeah. Yeah, this is Freddy San. Yeah, speaking on behalf of Angel.
No, that's only video. That's only video.
It's okay, you can video him.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Freddy San Martinez. I am the vice president of UTIER in Puerto Rico.
Okay. Yep. Great. We can hear you.
Great.
Okay. Thanks. I'm also seeing you in the computer.
Yeah.
Hi there. Okay. Well, like you said, after Maria Slam, Puerto Rico, there has been a lot of issues happening in the electric industry in Puerto Rico. UTIER, the Electric and Irrigation Workers Union, represents the majority of the workers in the electric company in Puerto Rico that is called Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority, or PREPA. We refer to it as PREPA. And we are the biggest union there. There are also 3 other smaller unions in the company. We represent the workers in the operations area that includes generation, transmission, distribution, the marketing systems. Well, in the most areas, we are the biggest representative of the workers there. In like about 4 months after Maria struck Puerto Rico, the governor of the island announced that he will start a full privatization of PREPA. PREPA is a publicly owned company that is the sole provider of electricity in the island, and also it is the biggest public utility in the energy sector in the U.S. in terms of customers, in generations, and also in revenue. So it is a big asset that the government has. But we here in Uchiel, we believe that they did not believe that they are not working in any way to restore the company. They just cut the funding of the company. And also, there were some discussions before that I heard here about talking about the problem with the use of funds, of public funds in the company. And here in Puerto Rico, after the disaster of Maria and after the announcement of the full privatization of PREPA, the government prepared a plan to restore the electric grid in the transmission, distribution, and generation facilities that goes up to $17 billion. And we are talking with congressmen, congresswomen about that plan, because what we believe is that the Puerto Rican government intends to use those $17 billion that are public money to restore in some way the company and then sell it. We believe that is a misuse of public funds. We are taking our steps to put the congressman, congresswoman about what is happening there with the money, so they can take necessary steps to assure that money is not used in what they want to. We have been working very strongly to let the people know what is happening in Puerto Rico, and the people get aware that the privatization of the system will not help in any way the service or lower the cost or improve the performance of the company. We believe the opposite, and we are very grateful that we have this opportunity to share and also to know what is happening in other countries of the world that face the same threat of the private sector, the savage capitalism trying to gain power of the productive sectors that the government has, like water, like electricity, communications. We believe that those services are exactly that, services, and must remain public, because those are rights that the people have to have. So we strongly oppose privatization, and we are very glad to be part of this. And I am also very glad to participate here. It's my first time here. I'm not so very good at speaking English, but I'm very grateful that you gave me this opportunity to let many other people from the world know what is happening here on this little island, this little colony of the U.S. So we get to know each other, that we face similar problems all the way, and we can probably make plans to take our offensive against the people that want to destroy the public service and privatize our companies that are also from the, with here Puerto Rico said that prepare ours, but ours we mean the people, because we also part of the people of the island. And well, thank you for the opportunity, and well, great to you all.
Thank you so much, Freddy-san, and Angel for those words and painting a very clear picture of what's going on there and sort of the very current and present struggle that you guys are in, that we're all, seeing bits and pieces of all over the world right now. We are very short on time, and we do want to have open discussion. So Mitch, Thea, and Johanna, I'm wondering if you can just give very brief, a minute or so contributions, so we can really get into a little bit of the discussion. Dick Rogers sends his apologies from Maine. So Mitch, we'll just go over to you from Food and Water Watch.
All right.
Mitch is the Climate and Energy Program Director. Hi,
Great.
Mitch.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, great. So thanks, Irene. Yeah, my name is Mitch Jones. I'm Climate and Energy Program Director at Food and Water Watch. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we are a US-based, although we have a Food and Water Europe in Brussels, so we work in Europe as well. We're an organization that actually was founded to fight privatization of water utilities here in the US, at least in part. And so our root 12 years ago was in fighting privatization. In recent years, we've become more involved on climate and energy work. And Sean had asked me to get on because we published op-ed in California a couple of weeks ago. Major utility there, PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric, is filing for bankruptcy because it is losing, it has been found liable for wildfires in California. We are calling, instead of having there be a ratepayer or a taxpayer bailout of PG&E, we are calling for the state to take over the utility and turn it into a public utility. It's a campaign that we're just ramping up there in California to push for the state to take over the utility and run it. And the one thing I will say is that as we've gotten involved in this issue, we've noticed that the investor-owned utilities and electricity have the same problem that we've seen with privatized water utilities. They don't make the necessary investments to protect people, to keep the upgrades that they need to prevent things in the electrical field, like fires. On the water side, obviously, water main breaks, because they're too interested in profit and not interested in serving the ratepayers and their customer base. And so I want to thank you all for letting me be on. I'm always happy when I get invited to be at a TUED call, and I'll just stop there.
Great, thank you. Let's see, Thea, we have Thea next. Thea is a professor of political science and was also very instrumental in the DSA campaign called #NationalizeGrid. I'll let her say a little bit about that.
Thank you so much, and this has been amazing and inspiring so far. So I'll keep it brief. I'm currently on the steering committee of the National Eco-Socialist Working Group, as part of which is a DSA working group. I'll get into that in a moment. I'm also the outgoing co-chair of Providence DSA, which for over a year has organized the Nationalized Grid campaign, which targets the investor-owned utility national grid with the overarching goals of decarbonizing, democratizing, and decommodifying energy in Rhode Island and in the US as a whole. As probably many of you know, DSA has seen tremendous growth over the past year or two. We are now 55,000 members strong. And as part of that, the DSA National Eco-Socialist Working Group is trying to push left on the Green New Deal, centering the working class, frontline communities, the just transition framework, energy democracy, and those types of issues, which are partly recognized in the current Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez Markey resolution, but not as sort of forefronted as they should be. So we're kind of organizing around that. I'll note that several DSA chapters around the country, including Boston, New York City, Chico, California, are adopting campaigns modeled after Nationalized Grid. So we've been really proud to have sort of inspired chapters around the country to target investor-owned utilities in their state and demand publicly owned utilities that are decarbonized and democratized. And I'll also just kind of wrap up by saying that in the US context, this is a really inspiring struggle, but also a really long struggle with a lot of different pieces to it. So in Rhode Island, in Providence, Rhode Island, where I'm a member of DSA there, we are simultaneously addressing the issues of fuel poverty, rate hikes, and a shut-off crisis where tens of thousands of Rhode Islanders are shut off a year because they can't afford the utility bills. We're also demanding more democratic access to decision-making around utilities with the ultimate goal of public ownership. We're also demanding transition to renewable energy sources and away from natural gas, liquefied natural gas that is fracked in the US, causing tremendous social and environmental damage. We're also supporting worker struggles. Recently in Massachusetts, national grid workers were shut out from their jobs. And so we were in solidarity with that struggle, and also sort of building these deeper connections between the environmental movement, low-income ratepayers, and the socialist left. So that's a lot of work to take on at once, but so we're doing kind of piece by piece with shorter, medium-term, and longer-term goals that we've also shared with other DSA chapters that are organizing energy and utility justice campaigns. And as a very last thing, I'll just mention that as part of the eco-socialist working group at a national level, we're finalizing a set of strong principles to orient our action and push left on the Green New Deal at a national level. And I'd love to circulate those principles to groups involved in this call, get folks to hopefully sign on and endorse them and use that as a framework to build coalitional work around the Green New Deal. So I'll share that later when we share a follow-up and contact information. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Thea. I'm just going to have John just say a little bit about what DSA is.
Yeah, just to mention for people who are outside of the U.S., I know some will know, some may not. DSA is the Democratic Socialists of America, which is something that grew up rapidly around, particularly the Sanders campaign has grown quite explosively over the last couple of years. I don't know what the current numbers are, but I know that it's grown hand over fist.
55,000 strong members.
Sorry, 65?
55. We've grown like almost like, I don't know, like eightfold or something like that over the past year or so. Yeah.
Right. Yep. And, you know, kind of the most significant new political formation on the U.S. Political landscape with kind of a love-hate relationship with the Democratic Party. Can I say that? Yeah. Or a sort of holding up the left flank of the Democratic Party, I think, and debating a lot about how that role can most effectively be played out.
Great.
Yeah. That's
great. Okay. And thanks for that. Also, I just want to do a time check. Are people okay to stay on for an extra 10 minutes so we can actually have a little bit of discussion after Johanna goes? I'm going to just propose that we extend it for an extra 10 minutes. And if people need to jump off, they can. We're just going to move on to Johanna Bazua, who is the research associate at the Democracy Collaborative, who's done a lot of work and writing recently on public ownership, and also has been working with community groups thinking about community-based ownership. So, Johanna?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for having me on the call. Really excited to kind of hear where things are at, both in the US and abroad. So I've been, as Irene mentioned, doing a lot of thinking and writing about kind of the public ownership campaigns that are taking off in the United States and kind of where we need to go to democratize our utility structure so that we can gain a just transition. And one of the things I've been thinking about a lot recently is obviously the Green New Deal and where public ownership comes into that. And you know, there are some mentions of public ownership in the resolution, but obviously, as I believe Peter mentioned, we need to go deeper. And so kind of the proposal that we've put forward in order to kind of be able to move some of these campaigns that are on the ground further through a Green New Deal would be to kind of retool what was the Rural Electrification Administration in the previous New Deal, which was started because investor-owned utilities wouldn't electrify rural America. We're kind of arguing that a very similar thing is happening with climate change. Investor-owned utilities aren't stepping up to the plate. But also they've been exploitative for much, much longer than that. So through this, we call it community ownership of power administration, where essentially through this administration, communities at the state, tribal, municipal level could gain access to the legal authority to take over their utilities at certain at like lower rates than what we have in the current constitution, where you have to pay like a certain amount for those assets, that you could get the technical capacity you need in kind of that transition and actually setting up utilities, and also the, like financial capacity, and very, very particularly getting access to low to no interest loans to do the takeovers and implement renewable energy and transition your workers from fossil fuels to renewables. And then also make that same kind of financial, technical, legal capacities available for already publicly and cooperatively owned entities that we have in the United States to transition them off of fossil fuels. So that is the broad stroke. I know we don't have much time and I really want to get to questions, but really, really interested to see how we can advance this within the Green New Deal and kind of take up this opportunity that we have out of a growing grassroots movement around this. Like groups like THEA's and What's Happening in Maine show that people want this, and we've got to make it happen.
Great, thank you so much, Johanna, for that. And I think that's a good segue into really, we just would like to open it up now for people to comment and ask questions. Unfortunately, we don't have Dick Rogers. He sends his apologies, but I don't know if people have information about legislation in Maine, feel free to jump in the conversation as well. Michael is doing a running stack, so I know Judy. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, and I'm going to have John facilitate this part.
Yeah, there are some comments that have come in through the chat. I think for the sake of time, I'm going to suggest that we focus on a couple of things that I think maybe warrant the most, or going to have the widest relevance to the most people on the call. And then hopefully we can get through everything, but if not, we've at least started with those. Obviously, we will circulate the notes. They'll be available, and the call is being recorded, so all of this will be available after the fact. But I know that David had raised something early on about the student strike. Given the time issue around that, it seems like something that we should spend a couple of minutes on. I did see a note from Sarah with the Bakers Union in the UK that they are aware of it. I know some of the other unions are as well. Pakamile from South Africa has asked specifically for more information because I think it was not on radar for her. I don't know if there are other people in South Africa. But David, I know you've been following this closely. I wonder if you could come in, give people a little bit more detail to kind of flesh out the question.
Thanks, John, and thanks all the TUED people for a great conference call as usual. Look, we're getting requests. PSI is present in 165 countries, and we're getting a number of requests from unions, from staff, to clarify just what is going on with this student strike. As you well know, the trade unions should probably reinvent the general strike because our right to strike has been whittled down over the years. So for me, it's an interesting potential. It's a very powerful potential that that labor needs to get onto. I mentioned briefly that it's 40 countries. I'll put a brief note in there, but so far I'm not an expert on this. The only warning I'll give, including in the note, is that the UN and the World Bank and a number of the other organizations that we're often suspicious about have created a number of youth fora, and in my mind, those are mainly about co-opting the young into the unsatisfactory climate change policy. So for me, it really is an honest question to unions on this call, and we're checking it out with our affiliates. Who's heard about it? Which unions are interested? Which unions are going to actually participate? Thanks.
Thanks for that, David. I know that Judy is on stack. Judy, do you want to come in on this, or is that about something else? Yep.
It's about something else.
Yeah, okay. All right, thanks, fine. Are there other people who have either more information from their particular national context, or maybe they've been following the international scene, the discussions around this student strike, that can provide any additional context? Or alternatively, if people have questions from, yeah,
John,
Warren?
John?
Yeah.
It's Colin Long from Australia.
Hey, Colin.
G'day. Yeah, it's a reasonably big thing in Australia, the student strike, and there is a number of unions now joining up with the movement. It's got some good claims in Australia, especially around putting an end to coal mining and opposition to the very big Adani coal mine, which is proposed in Queensland. The whole thing originates out of Sweden, and as someone said earlier, there's 40 countries are involved in the upcoming strike. It's there was a student strike in November as well, probably not as widespread around the world, but it was pretty big in Australia. I think it was, and this one in March is coming from that. Someone mentioned before, I think it was David, about unions should reinvent a general strike. Well, I'm not sure if people are aware that there is also a group or a movement building. I don't really know who they are, but it's a general strike for climate, and they've called a general strike around the world for climate in September, which is pretty optimistic and ambitious, but it'd be worth people following that. I don't know how connected they are to the labour movement, but it's a global call for a general strike around climate in September.
I have a link for that.
Yeah, thanks, Colin. We're identifying what seem to be the relevant links. We've got a couple of different things that have been identified. We'll circulate things in the chat, and we'll try to provide some guidance on what we can figure out. I'm wondering whether Sean, are you wanting to come in on this question, or are there others? Not sure if we still have Sean.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, I'm here. I got nothing to say except that we should closely monitor it and obviously, get the information out there. We don't have the capacity to really bring out people, but we can, spread the news to other unions in the TUED network about what's going on and maybe do a bulletin on it.
Right, yeah, I was going to suggest essentially, I think the same thing, which, well, an extension of that, which is that if people can, as and when you come across useful information on this, maybe circulate it either to the whole group or to us, and we'll get it out to people on the call as part of the follow-up, and then see what makes sense to take forward from there in terms of, at least facilitating some email exchange, and see who wants to pick up and take the lead on possibly going further if that seems like the right step to take. Is there anything else then? Pakamile, have you gotten what you need out of this call? Do you have any other specific questions from this topic?
Absolutely. I don't have a questions per se, but if I can just give a comment. For me, this conversation has been hugely invaluable because it sounds to me like the process that we're going through in South Africa is a process that many of the people on this panel have already gone through. And in fact, it seems like the struggle for some of you now is to actually claim those state-owned entities back. So I've gained a lot of valuable information, and particularly, from a propaganda perspective, our biggest challenge in South Africa has been that we have a media environment that is hugely dominated by the dominant capitalist narrative. There's very little space for any kind of alternative ideas or anyone to counter the dominant narrative. And the dominant narrative, sadly, has been that the government's renewable energy program is actually good for South Africa. That propaganda has been quite effective. So as a trade union, we've had a lot of work to do to sensitize communities, individuals. Media houses, frankly, are probably the last group to catch up and realize that these proposals that have been made by our government are actually not in the interest of the majority of people. This government has taken decisions which are going to enrich a small elite of private capitalists, and the working class and the poor will actually be worse off. So for me, this engagement has been so helpful because I feel it's going to really, really enable me to strengthen the work that we do from a propaganda perspective by providing me with alternative resources of information where we can sort of say how and why this process is actually doomed for failure.
Yep. No, I think it's really good that we've been able to bring you into the conversation, Phakamile. We've been working with NUMSA for some time, but it's always good to have energetic people taking the reins. So really glad that we could have that make that connection. We're really about rounding up the amount of time that we've got available, but I know I want to come back to Judy. Judy Sheridan-Gonzalez is the president of NYSNA, the New York State Nurses Association, has been very active in TUED, and I know was out all day yesterday on a very energetic picket that I unfortunately wasn't able to attend. But Judy, can I bring you in at this point? Hello?
Yeah.
There we are. Got you. Okay.
Did I get it? Okay. Yeah, just a quick comment, couple of quick comments. I think this is a fabulous experience for all of us. One of the things that's really different is we all come from different regions, and the level of consciousness of the working class in our areas is very different. I think we all do share this attack by this neoliberal agenda and the right-wing move to privatize everything. So what we're doing in our union, and I think it works a little bit for us, is kind of creating these analogies. We've been able to win people over to understand that climate change is a crisis, but the issue of privatization versus public ownership has always been a little challenging. Thanks to TUED, we're able to get some of that information, but I think whatever works. And one analogy that was helpful, if you look at the history of the development of vaccines, when they were funded by public agencies, they were much safer and much more effective. You could look at the Salk vaccine versus the Sabin vaccine, and the struggle between Sabin and Salk, if you want to look up that history, around making some, Salk said, they said, well, you're going to patent it? He said, well, can you patent the sun? This is for the public good. And certainly the animosity toward big pharma, and the prices they charge for all the research they've done versus something that's publicly funded and much cheaper and more effective and safer. Is a good analogy that I've tried to use that has been fairly effective. But this, even and we're at a next, at least in our country now, there's this kind of rising movement of dissidents, anti-capitalist dissidents that are gaining steam. We had a picket yesterday, and nurses are not notorious for being politically progressive or to the left. And we had spokespeople who said, hello, I'm from the Democratic Socialists of America. And we had these incredible resounding cheers and whistles when they said the word socialist. And I was really shocked that the nurses were so supportive of people saying that. So I think we're at a point in our country where we can start putting different agendas forward. And I know in Puerto Rico, this whole issue of what happened with the PREPA being completely underfunded, having all the layoffs, having no infrastructure, having the crisis there, and the system fell apart. And then now, having public funds put into the public utility only to be sold to the private sector. And I know that a survey that was done there had a lot of public support for privatizing PREPA because they felt it was ineffective. I mean, this is kind of the playbook that's used in all of the structures that are public that are seeking to be privatized. So I think we have a lot of work to do to get people to understand that public ownership is actually a really positive thing. And, any way we can do it is going to be critical, or we're really going to lose this battle. Just wanted to share that. Sorry to be so long-winded.
No, that's great. Very good. Do we have anyone else on this, Jack?
Just comments that have come in
Okay.
course of the meeting.
It looks like there aren't any other specific burning questions. We do have comments that we can circulate with the notes. So with that, then I think we are at time. I'll give Sean one last chance to come in if there are any final remarks that you'd like to make, Sean, as the TUED coordinator and chief brain of the project.
Well, first of all, I mean, the growth of these global forums is really astonishing. No one could have imagined that there's been such a vibrant discussions now for 2 or 3 years, but they seem to be improving both content and preparation. And but it wouldn't happen if it wasn't for the folks facilitating and doing the technical work, but also people, busy trade unionists and allies taking time out of their lives to be part of these conversations. And I think it's hugely important. I want to say a couple of small things though. I mean, when, you know, Pacamile didn't mention it, but when the president of the Republic, Cyril Ramaphosa, made his speech about breaking up of ESCOM, he cited the importance of just transition. And it was, to me, a deep irony that the phrase just transition should be used in the same breath almost as a mention of a breaking up a public utility and really making it ready for privatization. So in the struggle around narrative, I think we should get the word out there. We don't accept that kind of context. And those in the international trade union movement who are comfortable with that better explain themselves, because there are plenty of people out there tweeting about just transition all the time. But if that's what they mean by just transition, then we've got a job to do. And I think you may do this anyway, but I want to thank Lala and Colombia for doing the interpreting, from Citra Kali, and for Michael and others for his technical work, and both you guys as well. But let's keep it up and spread the news about TUED and keep the momentum going.
All right, great.
Right. We did record this session, so we will be sending that out to everybody, and also some of the links that have come through. So thanks for the very active chat box today, and for joining us.
And forward.
Sign off. Yes, forward.
Thanks, everyone.
And don't forget to send in your checks.
Oh, yeah.
TUED. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for that.
Thanks, David.